Welcome back to Strange Unknowns. Sorry about the huge delay in my uploads. A lot has gone on in the last couple of weeks, and I hope you guys all enjoyed the holidays. Just welcome back, and we'll continue on like that gap didn't happen. Remember how in my first episode on this channel, I talked about cognitive bias? Well, it is a two-way street. Both believers and skeptics need to keep this in mind. Even experiencers need to keep this in mind. In order to keep an open mind, it is important we avoid conclusions, because the second we think we know, we are eliminating the possibility of further learning. I am an experiencer, and I know this, but I refrain from drawing any conclusions. This method or behavior, I hope, helps those of you watching to simply observe your world and not be taken by any currents. Even the content on my channel. This is another episode of my personal experiences, and I'd like to start by discussing a few things first. The mind is everything. All of our sensory information, from our vision to our hearing, is how we know that we even exist or that anything exists. You might think of it like this. Somewhere in space and time, something happens. Due to this happening, and the governing laws of physics, there is a result. By the conversion or transfer of various forms of energy, this result, like a ripple in a pond hitting the shore, affects the matter around it, and so do those affected units of matter. Say your body is in the path of these results. The energy from the event now comes in contact with the body. Our bodies, made of matter, through various means of reception, then communicate to parts of our brain by means of electrical stimulation, a translated version of said event, which is then collected and processed and turned into perception of reality. This, of course, is a very summed up version of this topic. But remember this as you observe anything. Just think about this and consider the fact that we have a limited ability to perceive the world around us. In terms of the electromagnetic spectrum, we only put to use a sliver of information we come in contact with visually. We lack the ability to see radio waves. But does that mean they don't exist? We can feel the difference between 300 grit per square inch sandpaper and 40 grit, but can you feel the difference between, say, 100,000 grit and 101,000 grit? Even 110,000 grit abrasives? That's a pretty big difference, yet it would probably appear very similar to us. The same goes for sound and what we can hear. Can you imagine touch, color, or sound if you've never observed it? It's an easy question to ask, but nearly impossible to imagine. Almost as hard to imagine as being asked these questions having never experienced these things at all. To someone who has never observed these things, the best they could do would be to fantasize. To them, it would be just that, a fantasy. But what if we took advantage of this? What if, because reality is just being cooked up in our minds, we understood this and decided to observe this in action? We can imagine new inventions, yes, but would have to rely on concepts we are currently familiar with, or have been exposed to in the past. Our familiarity assists in our reality to some degree, yes? We give names and titles to concepts and things we do and don't understand. There is much left unsaid about these things in this video, but my intent is to bring some concepts to light in order for an easier understanding of what I am about to present to you. Anything that we observe outside of the means of our known five senses is considered extrasensory by our human definition. Therefore, having a sense of something that cannot be sensed by our five named senses would be considered extrasensory perception. Most people would call this psychic ability, but isn't everything we perceive technically a result of a result our minds are processing? One might throw those words out of their mind for this video. The words psychic and ESP powers have too much of a stigma, and with them a stereotype of people, mainly people looking to make money. So we typically might think of these as cons or snake oil salespeople. Maybe, though, we can discuss the possibility of truth in the sea of disinformation. After all, these concepts are not new, and the quacky idea we're taught to see as magic had to have come from somewhere. And like our observations, we should be able to describe them. Perhaps we theoretically present to a serf from the Dark Ages a small device like a phone or tablet. But before we revealed every step as to how it worked, would they consider it enchanted or magic? Would or could they believe it? I personally believe so, and I believe that anything can be broken down and understood by anyone. I fully believe that we define magic as 1, something we have yet to explain, and 2, completely impossible. This is one of the most detrimental words out there, for our development as a species at least. Rather, magic should mean, let's figure this out. Now, we can explore what I'm about to tell you. I'm going to start with what is commonly called scrying, or remote viewing, or crystal ball reading. There's a lot of information out there on these topics, but personally, I haven't found much of it useful at all, or credible for that matter. I'm going to share my experiences with you in this topic, and I'm going to teach you about how I go about doing this. What are my methods and my behaviors in order to achieve this phenomena? I don't claim to be special or anything. In fact, I believe anyone can do these things. I have shown one other person how to do this, and they have successfully done it. I'll tell you what I've seen. I'll tell you how to do it and how I think this works, not necessarily in that order. So, I know this trick that allows me to see things I couldn't possibly invent with my conscious mind, or at least I don't think I could. Even since my first time, I still don't know how to control or choose what I see, and I'm pretty much just gazing into a crystal ball, like you hear, and I'm presented with images of incredible detail. The interesting thing is that the first time I did this, it was not at all my intention to see anything or to remote view or scry or whatever you want to call it. I was just looking into this ball that I've had. I bought it online because I thought it was pretty and a cool little thing to have around. So the first time I saw anything in the crystal, I was completely blown away. It was like I poked my head into a world that I was just seeing. Now I know many of you are going to have 1,000 questions as soon as I start talking about what I'm seeing here. And I will get into how I go about doing this and everything from my observations as to how to achieve this. I'll tell you pretty much everything that I know about this topic. So, my first image that I was presented with, it was like suddenly I was on a trail, or just beside and above it. I was in a jungle, and further down the trail was what looked like a soldier armed with a rifle walking away. As soon as this whole image appeared to me, it was like everything was in slow motion, like it was in motion at first. And it was like hitting the brakes until it all completely stood still. It was like I was watching time freeze to a halt. But I could look around and make out all these incredible details. Beside me to my left was one of those tiny red grills. That was one of the first thing that caught my eye, because amongst the bright green jungle, there was this little red grill, and it was sitting atop some charred pieces of wood, almost like they had put it out and just left that gear right there. Maybe it was the soldier, I'm not sure. The grill was red and it had a slightly opened lid. I could see the little grill rack inside. It didn't look very old. The rack inside, which was pretty shaded, I could still see that it was a little bit shiny metal. Next to this was one of the many green pole-like trees that together formed a vast canopy that covered everything that I could see, as far as up went. The soil on the path looked packed from use, but fine and soft. I thought it would be soft to walk on barefoot. And remember, what I'm seeing here is just, it's mind-blowing detail. And I can pretty much see it until my eye starts going dry. It's a hard feeling to describe, but I was excited and surprised, to say the least. I stared at this, trying to make out every detail I could, for several minutes, until my eye was dry, and I couldn't blink. When I looked away, the vision in that eye was completely gone. That scared me. I mean, slowly I could start seeing lights and shapes and colors again, but for a moment I was pretty terrified. But after regaining my vision, I tried again with the ball. I could only see the occlusions and the defects in the ball as I tried over and over again to go back to that jungle trail with the barbecue, and it wouldn't work. This is a problem that I even still encounter, and I'll explain how to get around that. After several attempts and breaks, I was presented with another vivid image. Kind of like a fly on the wall, I saw a clearing where a military helicopter was landing. It was just like the last time with the slow motion, briefly, then completely frozen still. This helicopter was army green and had its sliding doors opened. And just below the door was this red tube, some sort of case that I thought looked like it might have held some sort of emergency device or raft. I could see that the grass, mere feet from the helicopter, was flat and being blown from the blades above. Like, it looked like it was lighter color and everything. Details that I wouldn't even consider normally if I was trying to paint that scene. I could see a few people in the helicopter. They were in full military garb and armed with rifles and on slings. The soldier I could see the best in the doorway looked like they were about to jump down to the ground. I looked around at the trees, and they looked like the same trees from the first thing I had seen in the jungle with the grill. And I ended up pulling away from what I was seeing here once again, and I couldn't see through that eye that I was just using, which scared me again. I decided to take a break, and I didn't really try doing it again until later that night before bed. I don't understand why everything I was seeing was military related and looked like it was in Central or South America. The gear the soldiers had looked relatively current. Their tactical gear and packs and even their firearms looked pretty modern, maybe 80s at the oldest. That night, I was laying in bed, and I gave it another shot, peering into the ball deeper and deeper until the point of my focus became the entirety of my vision. I was now in a residential part of some town. From the plants, the roads, and the buildings, and the people, I could tell I was either seeing Central or South America, again, at least my understanding of it. In this scene, I was looking at the front yard of a house that had some clothes drying on a line, and the open doorway of this house had what looked like a family watching outside. There was a man and an old woman and a small boy and someone behind them. They were watching, and I could see they looked concerned as these geared up soldiers were running with rifles at point, tromping through their yard and onto the road. My perspective in these images is kind of like I'm on a post, and I can't really like move around, but I can look around. It's like looking in VR almost. There were some nearby people watching as well. Some sat on the stairs to the right of my perspective. There was some stairs leading up to a building, and there was people hanging out on them, and they were watching this all go down. Then the image changed. I lost the image, and it went away, but I didn't pull away from the ball. And it kind of made this blurry swirl change from that to being underwater. And I could see the light from above the water, just like what it looks like when you're underwater. And I could make out some kind of bush, too, above the water. I saw flat walls and a slope and realized I was looking from the deep end of a pool. The bottom of this pool had a bunch of leaves and dirt, like not taken care of at all, and there were stains on the wall. This is where it gets kind of weird. Floating and sinking, I couldn't really tell because the image was still. In the pool were the bodies of 3 soldiers, similar looking to the ones I had seen earlier. From the looks of it, this was a pool you might find in someone's backyard. I could even see a diving board through the water. With these bodies was one of those white plastic lawn chairs. You know, those stereotypical white plastic lawn chairs. It was just kind of floating down by where I was and those other 2 bodies were. Kind of on the ground, but still not totally standing up. None of the soldiers had weapons on them, and they weren't at the bottom of the pool. I am able to freely look around and observe my surroundings. I thought I was looking at something I really was not meant to look at. This gave me the creeps pretty bad, but I continued to note the subtle details before my eye gave out again. I can't express the level of detail to you, other than saying it was like I was there, in the flesh. I pulled away again, totally blind in that eye, and considered what I had just seen. I went to bed and did not try looking into the ball for the next few days. Before going into more of the visions or images that I was seeing, I want to go into kind of how I think this all works. So now I'm going to explain this, as well as exactly what I'm doing when I see the images. But what does it really mean to see? Are we not seeing images while we are dreaming? Not with our eyes, of course, but images are presented to us, and sometimes in great detail. Like I said before, vision as we know it is not occurring in our eyes, but rather in our brains. Our eyes are merely taking in some of the data around us and relaying it to our brain. Almost like a messenger of the past, who is a witness to something or told something that he is to relay to a commander or king. After traveling for some time, he arrives back to the kingdom and shares the message. Is it the case that the messenger relayed every single detail of the message or account? To the person receiving the message, this would be 100% of their understanding. But because humans are fallible, it is incredibly unlikely that our messenger relayed 100% of the details. This is perhaps not the best analogy, but this is similar to the relationship between the eyes and the brain. Remember, we only see a sliver of the information we know is there. So what is happening here? How am I seeing these images clear as day? At first, I thought the images were just a result of my imagination. But I quickly realized how unlikely it was for me to imagine something that I've never seen before. And it's all at once, a fully rendered image or scene. Not to discredit the incredible abilities of the mind, but to see these details of plant life, architecture, textures, like I was actually there, seriously made me question how this is happening. Have you ever seen shapes in the clouds, or in the texture of a wall or ceiling? I believe this is a principal variable in how to do this. It's one of the ingredients, so to speak. The other ingredient is light. Because we see the world around us with light, we'll use these variables to trick the mind into seeing something that is obviously not there. And this is the key, I believe, is we're tricking our mind. The mind will always try to make sense of the data it is receiving. This is where I believe the greater mind takes initiative, and also where more questions start to flood in. I won't go too far into it now, but what if the greater mind, or some undiscovered mechanic in our brain or bodies, does in fact process information on a level that is currently not understood, and withholds that information from our surface consciousness? After all, I see no reason why it shouldn't. It does not seem to be a sense that would aid in our everyday survival, at least not from my experiences. Now I'm going to tell you exactly how I go about this, and I have found that you don't need a crystal ball at all. In fact, you can do this with anything that kind of gives you a chaotic series of patterns or tools that your mind can kind of round to the nearest product that makes sense. I've since been interested in this topic, and I've read people have had success with other mediums than a crystal ball. For instance, a black mirror can be used to kind of perform a similar thing. And I have a piece of obsidian that I've tried this with, but I find the crystal ball works the best for me. Sometimes having a lot of water on your eye or eyes helps kind of create this weird lensing effect, and you're seeing a little bit more of a particulate texture, which helps kind of conjure up these images in your mind. At least this is only from my experience. So I'm only talking from experience here. So if you go ahead and you try and look into a crystal ball, a quartz crystal ball with occlusions, you want that. You don't want to have one of those pulverized quartz balls because they're totally clear and your brain's just going to be like, I'm looking through some sort of glassy thing, and that's all you're going to see. But if you can trick the mind with these occlusions, that's where I find that the images really come and they're there. There's a fine line between seeing occlusions and trying to make out shapes like in the clouds, and your brain putting those occlusions and shapes into these ridiculously detailed images. I sometimes will start to fail and continue to only see the occlusions, so I'll try and manipulate the light source. So with the texture and the light source, this is really the key to doing this. So what I do is I have my crystal ball and I hold it way out at arm's length. And I try and spin it around so that way I'm getting just a little point of light, probably in the middle of it. It works best. And then I kind of stare at that. It really helps to like squint and almost get your eye out of focus, because if your brain, or if you can see the occlusions as they're coming in, your brain has already made sense of what it's going to see, and then it just shows you these occlusions. But if you can squint all the way up as you have it out at arm's length, and you're squinting with that piece of light in the middle, and you slowly bring it in, and keep bringing it in, all the way up to your eye, it's almost like your vision now pops out through that little piece of light you were looking at. And now, for me, it's like I'm looking into or through a hole where I'm observing all this crazy stuff going on. And this is not something where I'll see one thing and then my brain's like, oh, it's this, and then, you know, everything else starts kind of changing or anything. It's literally, I don't let my brain have an opportunity to discern what it's seeing up until my point of focus is that small point of light that has now taken up my entire vision, and then my brain is just made to act immediately. It better tell me what I'm supposed to be seeing. And that's essentially what it's trying to do. It is trying to make sense of the situation, and then boom, presented with this very high detail image. You may need to try this. You're going to try and fail and succeed, but maybe if you start failing, maybe just take a break and go back to it later. I have found you don't want to try too hard with it because it's just going to become a frustration. For some reason, I don't do it as often as I would like to, or I should, but some of the images that I've seen have kind of put me off from doing it. Like I said, I don't know how to control where I'm seeing or what or when I'm seeing, but there's been times where I've been able to move forward in an image. Kind of hard to explain. Let me go through some other experiences of this crystal ball, scrying, remote viewing, whatever you want to call it, that I have had. Okay, so there was this one time, and I try to typically keep a pen and paper with me so I can scratch down these details that I'm seeing. So another time I look through the ball and I'm seeing what looks like a man looking down at some sort of medallion in his hands. Below him, kind of in front of him, is this little dog. It's kind of like some sort of terrier or something, but it's looking up at him. I'm not sure if the man is giving the dog the medallion or what, but he's standing on this like a dirt kind of road or path, and at the foot of this ramp thing, it's like a bamboo erected ramp, a series of ramps actually that go up to these different levels, and I'm not sure if they were stairs or ramps, but this whole structure looked like it was some sort of entrance into a town, or maybe that was like a small town on this hill, because there was all these different tiers, and each tier had things on it. There was people there. There was like pottery and stuff. There was this little ramp thing that went out and then down, and it had this little like bucket lowering device, like somebody could pull up water or something from wherever that led to. This is all on top of these rocks, these really big rocks. There's these like bonsai tree style things all over the place. Very exotic plant life everywhere. It's very forested. To the left, it's like there was a waterfall going off, and a lot more of these bonsai trees. Each tier going up, because I'm looking up at this like sheer face, as well as kind of looking down at this dude and the dog, but my perspective was cut off by how high this thing was. And above most of the structure was a really big tree. It had all kinds of moss hanging down off of it, and it kind of went up between the waterfall and this rock cliff thing. And there was a little patch to the left of the tree and above the waterfall of sky that I could make out that was the sky. I had kind of assumed that this might have been in China or somewhere in that region of Asia due to the plant life and the style of the building with these pieces of bamboo. The man was kind of dressed modestly, nothing like super flamboyant, but it was like this like a robe thing, but it was he was wearing pants and a top thing, but they were kind of long. There was on the first tier above this man, there was pottery, and there was like a man sitting down like he was either chilling out or selling pottery. But the image was really pretty, and I'm glad that I jotted this one down because it was just a really beautiful image, very serene, and gave me a nice feeling. But that's all I know about that. I don't know when this was, how I even conjured this up in my mind, because I can sit there and look at it and then draw down on a piece of paper and still look at it. Just absolutely amazing. It's one of the coolest tricks that I've ever learned how to do in this life, and I have a lot more of these images that I have drawn out and the stories that of me seeing them that I'm going to do in another video. But this video has gotten quite long enough, and I'm going to make a part 2 of this. Once again, thanks for tuning back in. I'm sorry about the huge delay in my uploading. I'm going to try not to let you guys down. I've got a bunch of other videos lined up, but I figured I would cut this one a little bit earlier because of my huge delay, and I wanted to give you guys something special for the holiday. So this is my personal experience, and those are always my favorite, hearing people's personal experiences rather than an anonymous experience or someone from halfway across the world. I mean, I guess I could be halfway across the world to some of you, but anyway, with that, these are some strange unknowns, and have a good one.